Hi, and welcome to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly radio program about finance, money, and investing on Radio Northern Beaches and broadcast nationally on the Community Radio Network around Australia. I'm your host, Ray Treverson from OTG Capital, and today we're welcoming to the microphone Jonathan Elcombe, estate planning specialist from Elgen Estate Planning. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Ray. Thanks for having me.
Now, we've actually had you on the show before we went national on the old Dollars and Making Sense, and Dina was with us at that time, but no Dina this time around. It's just you and I.
Yeah, Dina is still looking after our marketing, but she's more focused in terms of the financial planning market now.
Yes, and certainly when I contacted Dina again, she was more than happy to put me back in touch and says, yes, Jono is always happy for a chat. So that's great. So look, because we're sort of starting afresh in the national scene, Jono, what I wanted to do today was really, I guess, start from an estate planning 1.01 and maybe before we get stuck into the meat and potatoes of today's discussion, maybe give the audience a little bit of background of who you are and where you've been and why you're in estate planning.
I'll quickly cover it off. So basically, I've been really looking at technologies over the last 15, 20 years and really looking at how we use technology to change what we do. And about 7 years ago, I was approached to look at estate planning and why it wasn't working and what we could use from a technology point to get into it. So just going back 56 years to sort of bring my estate planning journey in. My father deceased when I was 1 year old, and that created a whole lot of issues for my family. And that then I've always then been interested in that aspect because one never knows. So taking it forward sort of 50 years later, when I started getting into estate plan, I had a real reason to start getting it sorted out from looking at it in terms of how it could be done better. With most people deceasing, don't have anything in place. And that's really the big issue. So since then we've built out the technology platform, but now we're really working on the connections in order to get people to move it through. So I'm pretty sure your next question is going to be, what is estate planning? Is that correct?
Well, yeah, I guess, and part of Dollars and Making Sense is all about education. And so, what is it?
Yeah. So if you Google it or even ask Siri, it'll then say it's about creating a will and it's about disposing of your assets once you're deceased. And that's basically what it is. But because so many people die intestate, and intestate just means without a will, it basically, the government has taken care of that already. They've got legislation in place. Every jurisdiction in Australia, so each state and territory, has their own laws relating to this. So basically, that part's taken care of. So real estate planning to us is really about planning. It's planning for two things. One, if you pass away, which, trust me, every single one of us will, or you lose capacity. And in this day and age, the losing capacity issue is a bigger issue because of medical advances. So it's really the planning around those two things. And then you've got to relate it to your responsibilities, what your intentions are, and documenting those responsibilities and intentions. So the responsibilities could be your children, it could be a business that you own, property you own, liabilities that you have in terms of, well, obviously tax debt. Everybody seems to have tax debt nowadays. Your intentions then around about your funeral arrangements, if you lose capacity, how you'd like to be treated, and then documenting that either legally, which is your will, your enduring power of attorney or enduring guardian documents, creating list of instructions for those role holders within those documents, and then creating lists about what is included. And those lists change. So if we go through later on, we'll start talking about the different stages of life and what sort of lists and what sort of instructions you need to have.
And so, Jonathan, one of the things you mentioned there about people dying without wills being intestate. So it's something that we need to make clear, I guess, to the listening audience is that state jurisdictions prevail here, don't they? It's not a matter of a federal government. It's each state by state and territory where you actually die or where you live.
Let's go residence. Residence is always easiest to use because your documentation is related to your state.
So you mentioned about stages of life, and again, doing a bit of research before we came onto our call, there's obviously various stages of life. So let's start kicking that off a little bit. So the first one is post-teen years. So we assume that up to and including, you know, sort of teenage years and high school, people don't really worry about wills, do they?
Not at all. In fact, my daughter, who's 16 now, who now has her own superannuation account, right, is now starting to talk about that sort of stuff in terms of, well, there they have this superannuation account and they have to do binding death nominations. What does that even mean? So at least the conversation's moving forward then. But then the next stage of that is then documenting it in terms of so that your binding death nominations are done. And then you start looking at the basics in terms of an enduring power of attorney and an enduring guardian, which most teens, you know, teens once they turn 18, just basically assign it to your parents, because once you turn 18, your parents no longer have that legal role.
It's a curiosity to me. All my kids are in their 20s now, Jono. So in essence, if they haven't listed their nomination in their superannuation account, therefore they are in effect intestate, aren't they?
No, the superannuation is a different aspect, because superannuation, you don't actually own the asset, that it's held in trust for you. And so the binding death nomination then relates to who the superannuation company should release those funds to.
Okay, but it's not a good assumption to make. For example, if you've got older children living under one's roof, and certainly in today's Australia, that's a far more common occurrence. I have three 20-somethings living under my roof. They're all adults, and they all have super. And if they were to unfortunately pass away, it's not an assumed thing that that money would necessarily go anywhere without instruction. Is that correct?
It's a more technical aspect than that. The superannuation is pretty much taken care of. It's relatively new from a point of view of estate planning. If you think of estate planning as been going for hundreds of years, if not a few thousand years, superannuation, when they set it up reasonably well. So in most cases, it will go where it should, but it will take long delays if they don't have this in place.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so we've got the post-teen years. So I guess the really obvious one when I look at that is when one gets married and starts having children. I mean, to have a will or to have your arrangements in place seems pretty obvious to me, but that's not necessarily the case, is it?
Yeah, and it's not about getting married nowadays. It's about cohabitating. Yeah, it's really comes down to this aspect of when you are actually in a de facto relationship. And nowadays, even if you only spend 2-3 nights, so your 3 children that you have at yours, they might spend 2 or 3 nights a week with a partner. Yeah, they could be considered de facto from that aspect, and therefore they could be then entitled to a part of your child's estate. So it's really locking it down in that aspect as soon as they start cohabitating and as soon as they start a relationship, in order to start getting this sort of stuff in place.
So when you say getting stuff in place, what do you mean by stuff? I want to thrash that out a little bit.
Yeah, so the stuff aspect is an interesting word. We use it now because everybody's situation is different. And so the stuff that they need to get sorted out is on the basis of where they currently are in their life and where it's projected to go. Okay, so in terms of when you start cohabitating with somebody, you start looking at binding financial arrangements. You start looking at making sure your enduring power of attorney and your enduring guardianship is up to date to the correct people that you trust to make those decisions and look after. Generally, it's not the first person you start cohabitating with.
Wow, doesn't that say something about human beings these days? And I must admit, having been in the finance game relatively newly for my 62 years on the planet, I was in IT up until my mid-50s and then retrained. But the one thing that has always fascinated me going to conferences and listening to estate planning presentations is the myriad of situational circumstances that now confront estate specialists. And so you would find that on a day-by-day basis, I guess, Jono.
Absolutely. Nothing can be left out with estate planning. Everything comes out. Children, missing children, children that people have had or estranged, either that or that they've had them and their partners don't know about them. Second families, businesses, properties, investments. The amount of things that I've seen in the last 4 years since I've taken this on, I personally didn't believe half the stuff, but I come across it now on a daily basis.
You could write a book about it, I guess, couldn't you?
No, I couldn't. Privacy.
Well,
Just putting it out
the
there.
names,
Potential
the
clients could
names,
be listening to this.
the names and the names of the innocent and the guilty shall be suppressed, but who knows? So again, when you are married, then I guess let's get down to tin tacks. I guess a couple should set about at the early stages of actually writing out a will.
Yeah, will is actually not that important, as I sort of said at the beginning. What's really important is when they sit down and start their relationship out and work out what's whose in terms of what aspects they'd like to include as part of the marriage or the joint relationship and what's not included in the joint relationship. And then intentions then about if something was to happen to one of them, what the other would like. Yeah, because obviously when you marry, this is going to be the next person you trust, generally to your parents. Okay. But there's all this information that should be incurred and brought across to say, okay, if this happens to me, I'd like this, or I'd like that, or I believe in this, I believe in that sort of stuff. So there's a whole myriad of things to start having discussions about.
I mean, this never really crossed my mind until you just mentioned it then. But so what does the idea of, for example, a prenuptial agreement potentially fall in the remit of an estate planner?
Yeah, prenup is still a dirty word, and most people sort of go into it from an aspect of separation and divorce will occur. It's more about just listing those items and doing a binding financial arrangement so that if it does occur, yeah, then what will occur? So that planning aspect is already done. So going back to what is estate planning is about planning. That's where we see it nowadays. And it's in planning for the future, exactly the same as if you have a child. Yeah. So if I look at my father's situation, I was one. My mother was about 6 or 7 weeks pregnant when my father deceased. Yeah. He never had a chance to then say what his intentions would have been from a parenting perspective, what he would have liked, what should have occurred, all those sort of things. Yeah. It's a big ticket item in terms of that.
I guess it really comes back to the old adage, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And on that note, look, it's about time for a break here on Dollars and Making Sense. I'm here with Jonathan Elcombe from an estate planning specialist from Elgin Estate Planning, and we'll be back in just a moment. Hi, and thank you for listening to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly radio program about finance, money, and investing on Radio Northern Beaches and nationally on the Community Radio Network around Australia. The views, comments, and opinions aired during our program should not be construed or viewed as financial advice. Any commentary is general advice only and does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. You should consider whether the advice is suitable for you and your personal circumstances. If in doubt, you should contact an authorised licensed financial planner. We welcome questions and feedback, and you can get in touch with us via our blog, social media channels, or email. Please search for Dollars and Making Sense in your favourite podcast platform or check out our blog at otgcapital.com.au/blog. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly program about finance, money, and investing. And at the microphone today, I have Jonathan Elcombe, estate planning specialist. Now, Jonathan, before we went to the break, we were talking about death notices and binding agreements and the like. And I guess when you think about couples and relationships, and I mean, just simply finding a life partner can be fraught with travails and the like. And so when you start throwing money into the mix, it becomes a fairly difficult conversation for quite a lot of people, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And the biggest aspect that I find about estate plan is changing the mindset. And it's not just about money. It is about your intentions, about what you think, how you'd like things to go as well. So those aspects, and I know financial issues generally create or is a major reason for most breakdowns in relationships. So sort of getting the money sort of side sorted out first is a good idea. But it's also those other aspects, getting those what the goals are, where you're going to attain that.
Well, one of the things that again challenge me because I don't understand that this whole divorce situation, and I've seen situations where I've been married for 34 years now, and I've
Congratulations.
watched a number. Well, yeah, well, you have your ups and your downs like everything else, but I've watched some really. If you can have a nice divorce, I've seen nice divorces where people simply look at each other and go, you know what? We just fell out of love, and they are able to move on nicely. But it also reminds me of that very infamous movie, The War of the Roses, where they just this pitch battle, and no matter what, even in the throes of death, no, I'm not going to give up. And I've watched that kind of pitch battle, and some of my old army alumni that have gone through what I refer to in the financial planning arena as equity halving events, because every time they, they they go through a split up, whether it's a divorce or an estrangement from their cohabitating partner, they lose half of their assets, and they're sitting there scratching their head, looking at me, going, Ray, why aren't I that far, further ahead than I should be? And I go, well, stop getting divorced. That's a great start.
Yeah. I do agree with you, but it also comes down to that failing to plan aspect. Now, strictly speaking, going through a second divorce or a third divorce, you should only actually be losing half of anything new that you've gained since the previous one. So we go back to that planning aspect. You've got to actually plan after one and learn something from the first divorce before you get your second one. Sorry, before you start the second relationship.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. And again, on my background reading, we're looking at these stages of life, and we throw in, for example, it's very topical this year, I guess, in this country around NDIS and funding. When people have special needs, people in their immediate family or extended family, that creates challenges as well within estate planning, doesn't it?
It's an absolutely huge, and this is a very topical thing at the moment in terms of we have a whole generation of parents that have dug in deep, got their children through the teen years into early adulthood, and they're relatively okay. They're living as part of society. Society's opening up more to them, so it's they're actually sort of part of a community now. And the parents are now thinking, okay, what comes next? I'm aging myself. What happens to these adult children that are on NDIS? There's a whole lot of Centrelink stuff to do, and there's a lot of benefits tied into it. How do you then cater for them and get their estate plan done as well? At the same time, you're aging yourself sort of 20 to 30 years ahead of them.
Yeah, when the carer becomes the cared, and there's still
Absolutely.
a cared in the picture. And my word, I'm often surprised how many people in my immediate circle of friends and circle of knowledge, I guess, of people that I know of other people that are facing that very dilemma. There's a divorce, there's an NDIS child involved, and all of a sudden it gets messy. It gets messy beyond, and then you throw in the death of a grandparent, and the splits of estates, and I went through that myself with my mother passing, and I guess when you're trying to thrash through this myriad, we are also then dealing with the emotional element of grieving, whether it be a death or the hatred, if there's a split, or the reconciliations, all of those. I mean, on a day-to-day basis, John, how do you cope with that? Do you need to go and see a counsellor yourself after a few weeks of dealing with clients in this space?
No, let's tackle the first bit first. So in terms of getting through that thing, it's about creating a team. Yeah. The best recommendation I have now is to make a team, and your estate planning specialist that becomes part of that team, along with the carers, along with the accountant, along with the financial planner. Making a team is the best way of catering for that. Now, going back to part two, for me, it's about getting out into green space, going for walks, thinking through these sort of things and thinking, I'm helping people out here. I'm helping people out here. And that helps me a lot to deal with it.
Yeah, I guess it would. And so when you are looking at your overall picture, we've talked about that married life and now special needs. What's the next phase of life that you think people should be thinking about and considering? Because the estate plan that you have when you are first married is not going to be the same estate plan when your kids, for example, decide to leave home, are they?
No, estate plan is a dynamic series of documents, series of intentions, series of lists. Yeah. So it's got to change as you go through it. The biggest thing that I've found is really that mindset change about, okay, all right, so I've gone from that part of it. I'm now, just bringing something in terms of you've gone to the empty nester. So not your stage at 62, but maybe hopefully your stage by the time you get to 70 is you'll have a little bit more peace and quiet and you have access to the remote control yourself. So in that aspect, it's then it then comes to, okay, all right, we've got this, we've now got these assets and things like this. Now, how do I now get rid of these kids from being there so I can become the empty nester? Okay, so maybe it is about involving the banker mum and dad. Yeah, it's about looking at it in terms of how you can assist them. Yeah, and that also needs to be taken care of, because let's say, and I'll just use the example I always use, little Johnny, little Mary. Maybe little Johnny needs some help, but little Mary doesn't. And that needs to be balanced up, because most people want to be fair in their distribution of their assets when they decease. Yeah. So then writing those things down and covering those things off is really that next stage to be able to plan it. And it doesn't take much more than an agreement. It gets thrown into the overall estate plan itself. It's not expensive, and it gives you a way of documenting your intentions moving forward with little Johnny, so that little Mary is also okay with it.
So in your experience in building your own business and dealing with clients on a day-by-day basis, just as a spitball number, how often should somebody be sitting there through their life and saying, okay, I need to review my estate plan? Is something like, when you have a 0 at the end of your birthday, so 40, 50, 60, is that a good time, or is it every 5 years, or is it more related to specific events? So when the last kid leaves, or there is a divorce or whatever, what are your thoughts on that?
To me, it comes down to your appetite to actually tackle the problem. If your problem is big and you have never done anything, it's just a matter of taking bite-sized chunks and getting your 3 documents in place. And then basically every 3 months, just taking an hour or so and then getting intentions written down, lists getting down, and you basically cover that off pretty much for the next, 12, 13 months. Then after you've got that, so you've got the basics in place, your intentions are up to date, so you've done it in bite-sized chunks. It's pretty much then every probably 2 to 3 years, or every event that could trigger a change. An event that triggers a change is, the empty nesters, as we talked, getting rid of the kids out of the house. It could also be that you inherit or are about to inherit a large amount of wealth from your parents or your spouse's parents, and then how that should be then handled. Yeah, because a lot of the time now, it's not just about your estate, it's about when it passes to your children, whether you want half of what they inherit to go to that partner that they're currently with, because that then obviously becomes part of their inheritance. So then setting up those sort of processes. So it's looking at those different events, and then maybe every 2-3 years, just jigging a little bit in terms of your lists and your intentions.
So let's talk documents very, very quickly, because we just before we finish our show today. So the first one that they've got to consider is the last will and testament, correct?
No, I definitely go for the enduring power of attorney and enduring guardians first.
Okay, so let's talk about EPOAs. What, if you can explain what an EPO or an enduring, one of those.
An enduring power of attorney. An enduring power of attorney allows for somebody, it's called an attorney, but it doesn't have to be a legal person, to look after your financial and property matters in the case you have incapacity, or, for example, you're away traveling and it's then used as a general power of attorney. So that is actually the most important document, because most likely at some stage.
Okay, so I always thought the will would be more important. Okay, so the EPOA is more important, and then the will?
No, then the enduring guardianship, because most likely you're going to be incapacitated before you decease. So at some stage, you might be in hospital, you're having an operation, anything like that, car accident, you could be unconscious for 2 to 3 weeks and things like that. Yep, those sort of things need to be taken care of. So the enduring guardian, it's also my second document off the rank.
Okay. And then the will.
Yes, and then the will.
Okay, I finally got it right.
Yeah, and getting an enduring power of attorney is relatively easy. You just need, who do you trust to make financial decisions? It's an easy question I can ask, and people are generally, I can make that decision easily. With the will, it's a lot more complicated. So taking those easy bites first, exactly the same as, getting ready to get fit and healthy. You put your gym clothes on or your bag next to your bed in the morning and just get up and do it. You got that first document done and you're like, yes, high five, and you're pumped.
Wonderful, wonderful. So look, as we wrap up today's show, Jono, resources, where is a good place to start? And I'm not just going to say a Google search or the internet, because I think that's I get too fuzzy. If you were saying to somebody, look, an independent place to go and have a look and do a bit of reading away from the hubbub of anybody trying to pitch you anything, where do you think they should start?
Very good question. I've started to develop our own set of resources, but it's not there yet. And I think going off and Googling it just creates more of a headspace issue. So to me, I think the best place is to start with the planning. Just get a blank piece of paper and think about it. So who would you trust to make your financial decisions? Who would you trust to make your health decisions? And what are your intentions moving forward for the next 5 or 10 years? If you just take a piece of paper and write that down, I think that's the first stage. And then from there, I'd be talking to an estate planning specialist and just saying, what comes next? What do I need to do? Because at that stage, you've got it done. The Enduring Guardian, they're pretty much done for free nowadays. Yeah, Enduring Power of Attorney costs about $100, $200. So it's relatively easy to get those things done. And that starts you then on your journey and will then increase your appetite to get things done.
Yeah, I think that's excellent, sage advice. And given the fact that we only give general advice on this show, that's a good starting point. And I think, look, we've covered off some great ground today, John. I'd love to have you back. I mean, I looked at the material that we've been discussing before we got onto this show. There's so much more that we can be covering off, and the myriad of topics that we could be covering is really quite expansive. So, look, I'd love to have you back on the show in the near future. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for us today. And so thank you for listening to Dollars Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money and investing on Radio Northern Beaches and nationally on the Community Radio Network around Australia. We welcome questions and feedback, and you can get in touch with us via our blog, social media channels or email. Please search Dollars and Making Sense in your favourite podcast platform and check out our blog at otgcapital.com.au. And until next week, Jonathan, thank you so kindly for being with us.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Ro. I really like the show. Great name too.
And adios.